Excellent. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Good, beautiful Thursday morning. I can imagine all of you woke up early to be here. You canceled other events to be here. You thought, now this is why I showed up in New York, was come to this event. Am I right? Am I right? Yeah, absolutely. Nobody flew here for other things. We know this. Locally led development as a topic, as an experience, as a journey, the conversations, the pioneers who started this. I mean, this is truly, I believe, one of the most premier events that I look forward to every September. Yeah. We're probably still going to have more and more people come through. I know security getting into this area is going to be a lot, so we'll still have more and more people come. Don't worry. We'll find them seats. Please just either go to a back. We have a lot of colleagues who are here to welcome you. I thought before I do introductions, before I tell you my role, before I tell you what you've got coming up over the next hour, hour and a half, what's a Thursday if you don't get started with a little bit of music? I don't know if my DJs in the back have set me up. And I expect a little bit of movement. It's locally led development. It's philanthropy. It's Thursday. You should move. Let's go, everybody. You can stand up. You can and should. You've been looking forward to this. This is why we're here. This is equity. This is well-being. All the extroverts, I really appreciate it. You can move around. You can say we made it. We get to go home soon. Excellent. Woo-hoo. I want to thank everybody for showing up. My name is Nasra Ismail. I'm the U.S. Executive Director for Alight. You can ask me about all of that later, but really I'm here as a champion, as a friend, and as somebody whose life has been changed, absolutely. From the moment I met Degan, from the moment I met local leadership, from the moment I met those who embraced them, from philanthropy, from civil society, from government, from UN. This is a topic that's so close to heart for us. And so it's been a busy week. You've all had so much on your plate. So every one of you who's here as an individual, on behalf of your organization, to share your viewpoint on really this most radical topic, this most perfect topic, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for coming to what we are calling How Philanthropy Can Lead the Way to Locally Led Development, and wait for it, a Global South Roadmap. On behalf of our co-host, the African Philanthropy Network, the NEAR Network, Adeso, I'm going to get this right, please be patient with me, Alliance Socioambiental Fundos del Sur, WINGS, the Global Fund for Community Foundations, and CommonServe. I want to say on behalf of those, I also extend a great deal of gratitude and honor for all the work that is seen and unseen that goes into making an event like this. It's not the first time. If it's the first time for you, we've been doing this for a very long time. Because not everyone is here, and it takes quite a bit, resources, access, who you know, network, organizational street cred, all of the above. Because not everyone is here, we want to record this for those who are not here so they can join the journey and see what happened on Thursday, September 26th here in New York. So I hope you don't mind that. What's ahead of you? I'm so excited to kind of give you a lay of the land. We have a fantastic lineup of Global South leaders and philanthropists to explore how philanthropy, in a very particular way, in a very powerful way, has helped break through decades-long jam to advance truly locally led development, humanitarianism, and philanthropy all around the world. We're going to start things off with our great sister, our pioneer, our visionary, Degan Ali, the Executive Director of Adeso, who will give us some important context and contextual framing. And she'll pose very specific call to action for us to reflect on and help pace the dialogue today. After that, we'll have our other sister, our other visionary, our other pioneer, Mohsin Leode, Executive Director of the African Philanthropy Forum, who will be leading a discussion with Global South leaders. You know, we haven't seen a lot of them this week on panels as leaders, but I think this might be the first time where they are the majority. So she's going to be having a real discussion about what's happening right now. What is the perspective that we all need to be sharing? And what is something you can take away in terms of not only barriers, but really potential solutions that we all may not know about? And then after that, a fireside chat. Who are the fans of fireside chats, by the way? Raise your hand. I'm one of them. I'm always looking for the fire, but I think the idea is the fire is what gets created in the conversation. But at some point in my life, I do want an actual fire and a fireside chat. But Degan is going to be discussing with two prominent African philanthropists, Fanta Touré of the Girls First Fund, and Her Excellency Toyin Saraki of the Wellbeing Foundation, Africa. Then we're going to include you. We're going to open things up. We're going to have Q&A, and we're really, really keen to make this not just a dialogue from here on stage, but a group discussion, a conversation, a community gathering of ideas and recommendations. So please collaborate, share your thoughts. I want to thank our host, Ford Foundation. They've hosted us today. They're probably going to host us tomorrow. They will host us for as long as this discussion is right and the right and priority topic and the thing that most people around the world are calling for. So I say, sometimes we look at foundations as just sources of money, but they're also conveners and new norm makers. So I really, really, on behalf of everyone, want to thank Ford Foundation for hosting us. None of this could be done without them, and they're hosting us in a particular place, the Center for Social Justice, and particularly this room, the Dolores Huerta room. Any fans of Sister Dolores Huerta? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. As I got to learn, and I'm sure you know, and I really want to thank Maura for teaching me my own history. But yes, this room that we're in with that beautiful picture and all the memories that have come before us and people who have championed localization in whatever way that they have experienced it, she was the co-founder of the United Farm Workers Association and one of the masterminds and architects of the Chicano civil rights movement. It's worthy to note that that work is still ongoing, and Mrs. Huerta is still out there making good trouble. So, in a moment of silence, maybe we just pause of those that have come before us, those who you know, who are pioneering this work, and just take a moment of gratitude for about 10 seconds. I also want to acknowledge this incredible, incredible space and building that sits on unceded traditional lands of the Lenape people who have stewarded this area for generations. We honor their enduring connection to this territory and recognize the ongoing impact of colonization in Manhattan and truly everywhere in the world. We are a people that are continuing to move, at least in the American sense, toward a more perfect union, a more perfect nation, a more perfect planet. So it's evolving, and change is not easy, but it is worthwhile. Let me pause, and let me just say, at this point, the only thing befitting is to welcome our colleague, Saleh Booker, Senior Program Officer of the Ford Foundation, to welcome us on behalf of everyone. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Nasra. Let me begin with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but just in case. It's about philanthropy. It's from 1963, from a speech he made called Strength to Love. Dr. King said, "Philanthropy is commendable, but it must not cause the philanthropist to overlook the circumstances of economic injustice which make philanthropy necessary." And let me follow that with a quote of our current president, Darren Walker, who said, "We might recognize that philanthropy is not one thing, but rather a continuum that spans from charity on one side to justice on the other, and that we must bend economic, social, and political systems, the systems that made us, toward the latter." So, on behalf of the Ford Foundation, welcome to the Ford Foundation Center for Social Justice. This room, like almost every meeting room and convening room in the building now, is now named after a famous social justice leader, from Nelson Mandela on the 10th floor to Berta Cáceres, Muhammad Yunus, a room in honor of Tahrir Square, etc. And this is part of the transformation physically of the Ford Foundation building, but it's also symbolic of a transformation of at least this philanthropy in terms of its work and its mission. I first worked for the Ford Foundation nearly 40 years ago. I was a young man then. I had no idea what philanthropy was. I said, what, you're going to give me a job to give away someone else's money to people doing really good thing on the ground? And I was a program officer for human rights and international relations and governance in Kenya Kenya for Eastern and Southern Africa at a very dark moment in that country's history, a very repressive moment. But I got some deep insights into philanthropy at that time. The first insight was none of the program officers at the Ford Foundation throughout all of its Africa offices at the time were African. So we had a retreat at Lake Naivasha the month I arrived. We had a senior official from Ford fly out, and I raised the question. I said, excuse me, sir, but why are there no African program officers at the Ford Foundation? All the support staff are Africans, but none of the program officers. We have Latin American program officers in Latin America offices. We have Asian program officers in Asian program offices. And I thought I was making a really powerful point, right? And trying to disrupt, systems of inequality. And this individual was not perturbed at all. I said, oh, I'll explain to you. There are simply three reasons. The first reason is the first reason is we hire people who share our values because we're based on shared values. And I was really struck. I said, well, no one shared that list with me when I was hired, and how do you assume that I share these values? He was unperturbed. He went on, and the second reason is while we are grant makers and our job is to move resources and to move money, a lot of that involves writing, and most of our work is writing, recommendations, analysis, reports, et cetera. And so we only hire people with good writing skills. And I said, so in the year that Wole Soyinka has just won the Nobel Prize for Literature, you're telling me Africans can't write? And this individual said, and the third reason is if we hire African program officers, they will give all the money to their ethnic kinfolk. And I said, oh, you mean like all these white Americans who are here when they go around and they're giving all the funding to these other international white-led NGOs, et cetera. And so my tenure at that time at the Ford Foundation was a bit rocky, as you can imagine. But by the time I left, they hired their first African program officer to replace me. He was Kenyan, so they had to move him to the office in Zimbabwe. And the second one they hired was in Zimbabwe. They had to move him to Kenya, so they wouldn't give the money all the way to their ethnic kinfolk. So I tell that story, and I'm sorry to take so long in that digression, but to say the Ford Foundation has come a long way, but it still has a long way to go. So it is my honor to welcome you here to these offices. We have a great cross-section of Global South leaders, development practitioners, representatives of philanthropy, big and small, to tackle one of the most important questions that's being explored throughout UNGA this week. How do we disrupt these structural drivers of inequality and forge a path for systemic change? How do we move from charity to solidarity? The existing systems of global governance, of humanitarian assistance, of financing for development or aid, favor a few at the expense of the many, particularly countries and peoples of the global south, the global majority. Taken together, these systems of global governance constitute a kind of global minority rule, a kind of global apartheid, a system where on the one hand, the flow of benefits and advantages are directed to the wealthier minority of countries and the wealthy elites who hold power within them. And on the other hand, the distribution of suffering and the flow of disadvantages has continued to compound exponentially the historic damage that was imposed upon the global south through centuries of slavery, colonialism, extraction, exploitation, and eventually the integration of these global majority states into an unequal system of global governance, the post-World War II order, without compensation or reparations. And philanthropy has historically reinforced this global power dynamic of the colonizer and the colonized, the donor and the recipient, the creditor and the debtor, albeit with a patina of altruism. I believe that those of you who are gathered this morning collectively recognize it's time to dismantle this kind of thinking and the systems that keep decisions around spending and solutions separate from the communities and the people who are suffering the consequences of the existing world order. I know we're all encouraged to see philanthropy and the philanthropic sector beginning to respond to this growing imperative to shift power and shift resources. But I think our ambition may be too small, and if we don't accelerate, it may be too late. Thanks to many people in the room, there were 25 global grant-making foundations and 20 governments that endorsed this donor statement on supporting locally led development last year in this building. There was a signing ceremony and all that. And when I heard about it, I was like, well, we're not going to sign that statement, are we? I mean, it doesn't have any metrics. It's no outputs or outcomes that we're going to be able to say, so how much money is being moved? What percentage? Is the U.S. finally going to give 0.8% of its gross national income and the debt it owes to the developing world? None of that was in that statement. But of course, we signed along with the other foundations and donor states that were there. But for me, the real difficult thing was, what is locally led development? Is there any other kind of development? If development is not locally led, it has another name. It's called colonialism. And so that's why I prefer to talk about decolonizing aid and systems of development cooperation, including humanitarian aid. There's clearly a growing excitement and commitment to breaking through and reconstructing equitable, just, and sustainable systems of development cooperation. And I look forward to hearing from all of you as we collectively tackle how to move from rhetoric to reality. And with that, I thank you, and I will now pass the mic to my dear friend, Deegan Ali.
Thank you, Saleh. Saleh, you need to write those books. We have to figure out how to help you get that done. Saleh, his problem is my problem. We're both orators, we're not writers. It's the DNA of African people. So anyways, it's our combined goal to get a book out sometime before we die. Anyways, thank you all for coming. Good morning, and really just delighted that you chose to be with us today over the many, many hundreds of competing priorities at UNGA. I just want to talk about, first let me just tell you a little bit about something monumental that happened in CGI this week. For I think one of the first times we had a conversation and a platform for locally led development. There was two things that happened. One was a commitment to action that was launched on the humanitarian response in Sudan. And I don't know if you know anything about what's happening in Sudan, but the situation is a famine. And the UN and the international system is in Port Sudan and is not really able to provide response to majority of the country. And so who has stepped up is the local community leaders, people like me and you, who are victims of the problem of the crisis, and we decided to start feeding our neighbors. We decided, I'm a doctor, so I started providing free healthcare to people in my community. What we call in the North, mutual aid, it's just a network of volunteers. And they are doing the heavy lifting in terms of the humanitarian response. But they're not registered. They don't have 3 years of financial audit statements. They don't have any documentation whatsoever. They're just committed people who are literally risking their lives every day in the response in Sudan. And now donors are taking, for the first time, we have it on CGI, that there's a need to support local responders, frontline actors, and all of that. But there's no infrastructure in place. There's no actual existing Sudanese fund led by civil society. So we have diaspora groups sitting in UK who are now trying to figure out how, with all the sanctions and all the difficulties in moving money to Sudan. So that's one story. Then this other story is that in 2011, I had the crazy idea that we needed a Global South civil society network that would advocate for our issues, for our interest, because we kept going to Global North meetings in Geneva with ICVA, or an interaction meeting in DC, or bond meeting in UK, and we kept saying change, change, and put our issues on the table, represent us better in international forums. And I was like, why do we keep asking Global North to give us space in their own house? We create our own house. And that was the idea that led to the NEAR network, the first Global South civil society network that represents the interest of the Global South. So we founded them, we incubated them, and I'm happy to say now they're probably even stronger and more vibrant and resilient than Adeso. Soon they will surpass Adeso in terms of income, if that is the success matrix everybody looks at. So NEAR now has a reach of about 20,000 civil society organizations in Asia, Africa, Middle East, Latin America. And at CGI, we had a fireside chat to talk about the Change Fund that NEAR pioneered. One of the things when I founded NEAR that I was very focused on is not just creating the network, but the network coming up with solutions to how to move money locally, similar to the challenge we have in Sudan, but also a global challenge. So the NEAR has been working on this thing called the Change Fund. In 72 hours, a crisis is declared, and they make a decision on who to fund, where to fund. They funded in the most difficult places. They funded in Iraq, in Afghanistan, during the earthquake in Syria, in Somalia, in Malawi, and all of these countries. So if you can move money very quickly in these countries, there's no reason why you can't move money in Ghana to Ghana, or Senegal, right? So now the Change Fund was at CGI talking about how another solution, such as the Change Fund, that can move money. And I was just so proud to see that McBain, who's sitting back there from Malawi, running a local NGO called UNGA, and he was representing one of the recipients of the Change Fund. And, you know, I was just like, would we have had a local civil society organization that nobody knows about, not the big ones like AMREF, not the Brocs, on the CGI if NEAR wasn't there? If we hadn't come up with this idea as the Global South of creating a network for ourselves. So I was just so proud to see that McBain was there. He did a great job. It was a fabulous fireside chat. And the NEAR Fund now is reaching 11, in the pilot phase, they reached 11 countries and 240,000 participants. We call them beneficiaries in this space, which is a term I don't like. And now it's in phase 2 of the fund. So now, how did this get created? Who were the seed actors that took the risk of helping us turn a wild idea like the NEAR network, a wild idea like the Change Fund, a wild idea like Kuja and other solutions that are coming out from not just Adeso, but the Global South or the Alliance? Who did that? It was philanthropy. It was philanthropy that was willing to be risk-willing. It was philanthropy that was leaning forward into risk and is able to catalyze and fill the space that we know is so difficult for bilateral and multilateral donors to do. So this is, for me, why philanthropy is such a key part of creating an opportunity, a space for new solutions and new ideas. Because philanthropy can do what other donors cannot do. So I want to then talk about why the Global South Roadmap. The Global South Roadmap is important because I've been doing this work for so many years. And I will just tell you, one of my biggest pet peeves is, I'll give you an example, localization after the Grand Bargain commitment of 25% that Adeso helped get established. That target wouldn't have been there without the Global South leading it. The target came from us. It wasn't from the North. Who got most of the funding? INGOs and UN agencies got more funding to do localization than the Global South themselves. I mean, like, it's just the most amazing display of lack of understanding of, like, nuance. I mean, it's just like, wait a minute, localization, and you just keep giving money to the same institutions to do that. And I cannot tell you how many times I have seen Global North actors come up with well-meaning, good-intentioned solutions for problems in our countries. But we need to stop that. Let's fix that impulse where you fund these Global North institutions because they have a nice brand, they have nice reports, they have nice things, they're part of your network, they're credible, they're trusted, and we need to now lean in, like I talked about, and be risk-willing to turn crazy ideas into reality for the Global South. We need to be in the driver's seat, and our solutions need to be funded. And that is why we are talking about a Global South roadmap. There are so many amazing work being done. Epic Africa has a tech platform for African civil society. APF has another platform for African civil society. There's the socioeconomic funds, the alliance that Amalia will be talking about. It's not just the NEAR network. There's so many ideas and solutions emanating every single day from the Global South, but we don't resource them properly. And so if we are really talking about solutions and turning rhetoric into actions, then we need to be funding these ideas and these initiatives and putting our money where our mouth is. And that is a call and a request, maybe even a demand to the philanthropists. Yeah? So I just want to say that times, and I want to appreciate what Saleh talked about. Language is important, yeah? And the language that I'm very comfortable with, and I always talk about, I don't like localization. This is a very political issue. This is not an issue about only moving money. System is there by design. And I was at the Wings event the other day, and I said something that was probably considered very controversial because I was talking to somebody from the Global South, and they said the system is not broken. It was designed exactly this way. It is working perfectly for those it was designed to benefit. And that was considered just very controversial for me to acknowledge that, the fact that people in Palestine and Gaza are dying and the system is okay with genocide. You know, the system is okay with apartheid. The system is okay with Sudan. The system is okay with Congo. The system is okay with all of these things. So this is a decoloniality, this is a decolonization conversation. It's to recognize that the architecture is not broken, but it must be, we in the South must be in the driver's seat to not only come up with solutions, but really turn this political conversation into something that changes the entire architecture completely, uproots it from the bottom up. And if, like what we did with NEAR, if they're not willing to change their house, we build another house. Move to another neighborhood. Move to another country if we must. But we need to do it ourselves. We need the philanthropic capital right now as a catalyst, but eventually we need to start thinking for ourselves about how we resource, how African philanthropy, how our communities can resource these initiatives, how we generate income for ourselves so that we're no longer dependent on Global North generosity. Yeah? I mean, it's funny that we think of it as generosity rather than reparations, right? We shouldn't feel obligated and obliged to think that they're helping us and they're, you know, this is a system that was broken, and this should be seen as reparations. So I urge us from philanthropy, from partners in the civil society space in the North, INGOs like Oxfam, who have been very amazing allies. I urge all of us, and the Global South especially, that we need to be really in the driver's seat. And this roadmap needs to be something that we create, and we should not be accepting anything less than us being in the driver's seat going forward. Thank you.
This is when I really don't like my role as an MC. Can't follow Dagan except just to say thank you for the honesty and the transparency and this call for a more beautiful world. One more round of applause for Dagan and Saleh. We're also running a little, typically, behind schedule, so forgive me, but most soon, if you wouldn't join me to just help gather your panelists and these incredible conversations that's gonna continue. We'll give you a moment, and maybe you can come up here.
Front. Sorry, excuse me. Thank you. Can you hear? Oh, fantastic. Hello, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to the very first panel of this session. I feel we're done already, right? Now, Nasra is amazing. She got us off on a good start, and then we had Sally, and he took us back and forth, and then Dagan just, we feel like they've done the job of the panel. Round of applause to everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much. As Nasra mentioned, we are behind schedule, so we want to try as much as possible to bring us back right on schedule, but also share the most important bits. Oh my, sorry, Ford. I don't want to have to pay for anything. I'm a grantee. Right. My name is Mosunlayo Ode. I'm the executive director at African Philanthropy Forum, and I have the honor of being the traffic warden during this session, and I have an amazing panel, to be honest. You already heard about NIR. A lot about NIR was shared just now, and we have Anita from NIR. We have Amalia from CASA Socio-Environmental Fund. We have Tariq from the World Congress of Muslim Philanthropists, and we have Benjamin from Wings. And they are all going to be sharing about how we're going to get, this roadmap going, how we're taking the driver's seat, taking the wheel as we move this conversation forward. It's been an amazing week, and I think this is a great conversation to have, even as we're wrapping up during the week. And I'll just go straight into it and ask Anita, just to also, in addition to what Dagan has already shared and the work that you're doing at NIR, one of the questions I get asked a lot when I'm in meetings is what is locally led? How do you define a local organization? And NIR has done a fantastic job of doing the research, the groundwork, and putting specific definitions around what you would consider locally led. So can you start us off with that, Anita?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Anita Katukuri. I'm the policy director at NIR. Locally led development, how to define it, I think Saleh actually already covered that. And it's like, wow, that's one point just checked off my list. And then actually all of my talking points, I think, were already said. So I'm like, is there even need? No. Locally led development, locally led humanitarian action, all of these things depend on a first definition of who is local. And this is a really, it can be simple, or it could be very complicated. NIR members, of which there are 276 currently, full members, and we, as Dagan mentioned, we have relationships with 18 national NGO networks in that account for our reach of 20,000 at the moment across 40 countries in the Global South. And a representative community of this group came together and defined local in our first years. And it was hard. The international community spent 9 months debating very complex conversations about who is local in the grand bargain conversations, and really, really struggled. And in the end, came up with a working definition. NEAR's definition is based on basically 3 dimensions. The first is an organization that's present before, during, and after challenges that communities face, whether it's a crisis, a large-scale crisis, or not. They are accountable to communities and local laws. That is necessary. Their primary accountability is to the communities they serve. And the third is that they are locally led and not internationally affiliated. This is the simplest, cleanest definition. Affiliation, of course, gets complicated, you know. How do we define affiliation? But I think that in what is important to remember about locally led development, locally led humanitarian action, peace building, climate resilience, all of this stuff, is that if we are going to shift how these systems work, we really have to remember who we are trying to invest in, who is at the center of this. And if we create and operate with wide definitions of who is local, then we're never going to reach the intended audience. We're never going to get to locally led development or locally led humanitarian action. And I think that defining local as simply and clearly as possible, as our members have done for us, is a really necessary first step in ensuring that international actors are investing the right way.
Thank you very much, Anita. For me, the best definition of, you mentioned the points, but for me, it's they were there before, they're there during, and they're there after. Simple and short. Perfect. Thank you for putting that together and for helping us have some context when we're having these conversations. So I'll move straight to Tariq. Like, how much more local can you get than faith-based, right? Like, there is a church, there is a mosque, there is something near everyone, and they are the first responders. Those are the institutions that people go to in time of need. So, Tariq, I would love you to speak to the power of Muslim philanthropy. I mean, it's so powerful that giving is a pillar of faith or one of the pillars in Islam. So can you speak to the power of Muslim philanthropy around the world, its size and scale, as well as its ability to respond to local community challenges?
Thank you, and a very good morning to you all. There are about 2 billion Muslims living across the continents, making about 1/4 of the world population. And like every other tradition or no tradition, they're also giving their time, talent, treasure to the social good. And in addition to that, there is a mandatory giving that they have to give 2.5% of their income every year. And by the very careful estimates, the zakat amounts today is about $300 billion a year. But the story is very funny. I got interested in Muslim philanthropy about 25 years ago. And until 20 years ago, this was an unknown, giving, a form of giving. About 15 years ago, it was coming to the radar of the people, but not positively. It was not so clean giving, not so safe giving, perhaps funding radicalization, and all sort of those challenges that we have to face to prove that the Muslim giving is as good as any other giving. And Muslim giving is also not immune to fringe elements like any other tradition or giving. So you cannot paint, billions of dollars giving that is given with the 1/4 of the world population as a giving that is not safe. So we had a historic session at United Nations headquarters back in 2012, co-sponsored by Organization of Islamic Cooperation and World Congress of Muslim Philanthropists, which was the first ever Zakat Summit. And in that summit, we invited the member states, we invited the agencies and others to highlight that basically there is a huge potential that if it is tapped right, if it is leveraged, if it is directed right, it can be a big change driver as well. So I think we passed that identity crisis or that negative imagery that we fought. And now the next challenge is that the northern-based entities, multilateral agencies, they are now very fond of Muslim giving. The zakat is becoming their darling. And I'll give you an example. UNHCR has raised over $250 million in past 5 years. And I'm not against that, and to be honest, personally, I do not believe in this North versus South. I think there are challenges on the both sides, and money is not the only solution for that. The reason is that if $300 billion, an overwhelming majority of that is actually going into local organization, then why we are not seeing a significant change? So then the question comes of the capacity, of the efficiency, and I think if the money has to flow to the South and to the local entities, a part of that has to be mandatory to be invested in their capacity. And one thing that they are by and large missing is, and I think two, one is the strategy, and second is how to collaborate with each other. They are working on different issues in silos because of logistical challenges, because of a lot of other things. But I think there is a need to have a forum of the South that actually collaborate with the others, especially in the areas where we are courageous, honest, and bold to say, yes, we lack in that, aspect of the efficient giving and service delivery. So the other challenges that we see within Muslim giving is that we are not very diverse when it comes to the issues. It is either very faith-based or it is only, which I call is overwhelming portion of the Muslim giving today is meeting the service gaps in the countries which is created by their own government's inefficiencies or lack of governance. If I keep on teaching the kids or running the schools from my philanthropic contribution or dispensaries, not making the government accountable, that it is their duty to make sure that every citizen has an access to education or to quality education. So the advocacy part, the accountability part is also very much missing. So another effort that we are making is how to connect the various actors within South, how to also raise the issue awareness so that they are not just the service delivery organizations, but they are actually system changing or the change making organizations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Perfect way to end that. We need to look at root causes. We don't need to solve symptoms, but we need to address root causes so that we're actually moving forward in terms of development. And there's a lot you said that needs to be unpacked, especially around building capacity of these local organizations. And I know that Adeso, I'm not sure if it's Adeso or one of the many organizations that Dagan has started or is supporting, is thinking of providing back-end support for nonprofit organizations to make them attractive to donors so that there is no excuse when it comes to due diligence. You're able to meet all the, cross all the T's and dot the I's and ensure that they're funder ready. So I'll come to you, Amalia, and I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the fact that philanthropy is flexible and funds differently from if we look at other areas or other ways that funding come. When we look at government, we look at multilateral and international organizations. Philanthropy is more flexible and more innovative and willing to take risks. So I'd like for you to touch on what unique role you have seen philanthropic organizations play in supporting locally led development and, actually, I would like to get your thoughts on that, because you had an interesting thought when we had a conversation before we started. So how do you feel about that?
Well, thank you for the space and for the question. And it's a reversed answer. That's why we kept the question. But first of all, I just wanted to say, I haven't been meeting Degan very long, but I feel, I know when I hear, it's like I've been along the years, as you go, like the last 40 years, questioning so much the same things that we just heard here, that it's almost like you have to be pushed out. You know, shh, shh, don't keep asking the same things. No, you're disrupting. But it has to do with the answer. 40 years ago, when I figured out what philanthropy was and how great ideas in the global north where the money sits, for all the problems that we already know, right? Extraction, over-extraction of our resources from south to north. So there's a lot of reasons why wealth sits in the north. And I was back in college in California, and I said, wow, look at this. I should figure out a way to actually reverse the process. So I met indigenous peoples in the Amazon, and I said, I'm going to go there, work for them, figure out how to get money to the hands of the people who really are protecting the forest. Because you got all these ideas over here of international organizations claiming to save forests, and I was involved with one, and I said, how can you save forests from here if the forest is over there? And for 20 years, I know, as I was already back, I was trying to figure this out, and it was the same everywhere. So the socio-environmental funds is how we call it, or organizations, because it is about protecting this planet by strengthening not the capacities because they have, but strengthening the ability of these very excluded, the most vulnerable communities, and in the most important places for life on this planet and climate regulating biomes, to actually be able to be brought into the conversations, have stronger voices, and have resources, because they've been protecting these places with their lives and no money, literally. So we were learning about this for a long time, and still the money wasn't arriving. And finally, we said, okay, if it's not arriving, because there's all kinds of restrictions, right, from north to south, plus these people are never going to ask for anybody for money because they don't speak English, because they don't know philanthropy exists. We need to figure out a way to get the money to them because we know them. We are part of this ecosystem. We belong to it. We are activists ourselves, and we are already working in networks. So we decided, okay, we're going to have to set up a fund because there's no other way. This is never going to happen if we don't do this. So 20 years ago, I founded with these colleagues, the Casa Socio-Environmental Fund in Brazil. We were a South American fund because we were looking at the whole biomes. Eventually, a few years back, we thought, it's too lonely to be here alone doing this. Let's see if other activists who are already experienced people in other countries would like to take the tools and have funds in their own countries, because then their communities will have a better, easier time, and we can actually grow the pot. It's not about slicing the pie. It's actually together we could mobilize more money. So we helped 5 countries, five funds to get started in 5 countries, 4 in South America, 1 in Mozambique, because people were looking for models. And suddenly we were like, okay, this is we're growing now. We're growing in numbers of local socio-environmental funds that care about all aspects, all of the forest peoples, all of the biomes, not just forests, about people living on this planet everywhere. So we have a real good design, very efficient, very scalable. Just Casa alone funds around 500 grants a year, all across Brazil now, and then we collaborate with other funds. So we created the Socio-Environmental Funds of the Global South Alliance. We were 9 funds 2.5 years ago. We're 15 funds now already. We're covering 50 countries, all about infrastructure. And we help each other grow and pick up the systems fast and meet the funders and draw the resources, both locally, of course, locally in the global south is a huge challenge, if it's not coming from church, I guess. But most of our countries don't have this in Latin America. And so we're still doing this, so this is what Benjamin is going to talk about. But the whole risk thing is that we actually remove the risk, because there is this concept, right? Oh, the philanthropy of the North, they've taken a few risks, I guess, but if we exist, it's way less of a risk. It's way more of an answer. We can actually get way further by, and that's why we also don't call ourselves intermediaries in the sense that they were, though that it's known here. We actually came to add another layer to the so-called long-standing philanthropic field, because I think, historically there was the big funders, right, the private foundations with the money, and the so-called intermediary funds in the North. We call them solidarity funds. Some of them actually took the money and began to fund our causes 40 years ago. And then we showed up because we realized there's a whole other layer in our society that wasn't getting anybody's money. So we think we contribute greatly to the design, the architecture of global philanthropy. And and now my theme, going anywhere, and we're going more to Africa, I can see that there's more interest. There is a lot of community philanthropy, but maybe they don't know how to explain what they already do in terms of protecting the planet, protecting the major biomes that are. Global South for us is a political term. It could be anywhere on this planet. It's about the disenfranchised, the most vulnerable. It doesn't matter where they are in the hemisphere. But the major biomes that keep this planet alive are in the southern hemisphere right now. And we are the ones who are there belonging to this system. So we can help disburse money in really safe ways and remove risk. So you can take a little risk, but it's not going to be a big one. So that means we can help you get the money there to protect the future of humanity on this planet, because these people are the ones that are the only ones that can do it. You're never going to save the Amazon from the outside. You're going to save it by feeding its roots. The people who are there are not going to let go ever.
Thank you so much, Amalia. Thank you. Incredible story of growth in a few short years. Well done. Still sticking on the role of philanthropy, Benjamin, I'm coming to you. You run Wings. You're the network of networks. You're an umbrella organization, and you have I would say, a helicopter view of what is happening, both from the north and from the south. So how can you speak to how philanthropy can help promote, or how philanthropy can build infrastructure that would help promote locally led development?
Yes, well, thank you. And well, first I'd like to just acknowledge all the incredible insights we just heard. It was everybody that's just shared their views were just so inspiring and so complimentary. So just wanted to thank everyone. The perspective I can bring on in this discussion around locally led development is indeed about how to think about the not only locally led but also locally resourced development as much as possible, and thinking about ways we can build these infrastructures and these ecosystems, some of which have been described today, that can help really resource from the bottom up social movements, communities, frontline communities, etc., etc. And so we heard some great examples like the Proximate Fund, the Change Fund, the social environmental funds, and other forms of enabling this resourcing in a way that really is in the hands of the communities that lead their own development. So I think the role of philanthropy in this is, there are different dimensions. One, and the first, maybe the starting point, and that's most of the conversation right now around locally led development in the philanthropy sector, and in the, also with bilateral agencies and other investors, is around, it's a bit of a technical discussion. How do I channel more of my grant making to local actors? And that's a starting point, that's critical. But it goes way beyond that technical question, as we just heard. So beyond that, there's how you build this capacity locally and enable the overall civil society to to build their own ecosystems and then to build their own resourcing. And so that's a role that philanthropy can play. As it was said, we can invest in things nobody wants to invest in, and that's the kind of things that are critical, strategic, and nobody's really thinking about. It's all about how do I move my money, and I need to check that box. And so, but it's more like an individual basis. And while we could have a great collective impact by nurturing horizontally a local ecosystem, I think philanthropy can do that. And is doing it to some extent. But it's funny because at Wings we work on that. Because we bring together all these networks and these groups that help grow giving on the ground, that help harness also the existing giving and traditions of giving in ways that bring about more systemic change, as you just said. We're trying to help enable that growth, and it's interesting to see that we had more interest from bilateral cooperation agencies than from foundations. I think foundations are a bit stuck in a vision of this ecosystem as being like with a transactional perspective, like what's in it for me, what service is it going to deliver for me as a foundation. And it's hard to shift to thinking, well, this is actually an investment in collective impact. If I help building these networks, if I help build these local funds, if I help build this horizontal capacity, it's not just for me to be able to make my grant making locally, but it's actually going to enable an entire space, and it can help, as it was said, to truly change and shift the aid architecture. It's not a technical question. It's a way to completely change the way the whole development system works. And so I would say the last layer is really looking at building these local resources, and it's really important because right now most of these funds and they depend, as it was said by Digan, on external money, and that's right because there's a dimension of reparation and there's a dimension of being a catalyst. So that makes sense, but there's really, I think, a big priority now in thinking about how to harness local resources to make all this work more resilient, both financially, but also politically, because one of the issues we're facing in a context of growing authoritarianism and shrinking space is that it's very easy for governments to say, well, all these civil society and all these groups, they're foreign agents. And it makes it very vulnerable because it's so easy to just cut one or two big international funders and then you sort of starve an entire ecosystem that is working so well. And so there's here, I think, a big strategic issues for the philanthropic sector to think about these questions and to invest massively in building these local ecosystem for civil society capacity and civil society resourcing.
Thank you very much. Right on time, because we have to stop at 10. But I think it would be worthwhile to just pass the mic all the way down, starting from you, Benjamin. One last thing. If we had to work out, what do you want us to work out over here with around this issue that is most important? 10 seconds.
Well, I think what I just said is what I would like us to work with, like, invest in building these local ecosystems. It's not a technical question. It's a very strategic, very important question. And I would just add, I think decolonization, locally led, it's really something that goes beyond technical issues. It's a mindset shift. It's a worldview shift. And it's not because you're a local organization that you have a decolonized view.
10 seconds.
It was really 10, it was a true 10 seconds? Man, it's impossible.
But thank you. No, wrap it up. It's fine. Thank you. No. I'm asking you to land on your point.
So it's like just on the worldview. I think it's also for local organizations. I mean, I've seen local organizations in the global south just replicating the exact same models of the global north where they were not listening to communities. So I was just ending on that point around it's a mindset shift for all of us wherever we stand in this ecosystem. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, regardless
all
of
right.
where we are.
So would you like my 10 seconds? Okay.
No, we're not sharing.
Philanthropic spirit. I'll just say one quick thing that I'm also wearing a hat for Alight and being its executive director for Pakistan-Afghanistan program. So we did a small pilot, and this is interesting because we being an INGO working in that region, we have helped forming 3 local organizations that we incubated and later we graduated them, built their capacity of raising their own funds. And one example is Pakistan Alliance for Girls Education. It's called PAGE. So I think even when you are in that space, and you may not have that special grant to actually do that process, you can still put together some resources, put your man hours, and take the very vibrant, dynamic local actors, bring them home inside your space, and then build their capacity.
Thank you so much. Amalia.
Yes. I think the main ingredient for what we're doing across the Global South is the collaboration, cooperation, power with. All of our design, and I invite you to actually look at it, because what we did with our systems was we didn't take anything, any reference from conventional philanthropy. Not the roles, not the names of the roles, not the relationships. We designed a system that responds to real needs. Every time we secure funding, we ask the communities what they need before we actually create. A call for proposals, we remove subjectivity in every sense, no gatekeeping. So I think leaving you with the thought that philanthropy is all about, at least convention, it has a lot to do with power over. In every bill, and we need power with.
Thank you so much. Anita, final word.
There's so many things actually that I want to respond to. So I'm going to not observe the 10-second rule. I'm going to. I will take a little bit more. But okay, few things. 3 things actually. The first is, I'm going to echo Benjamin's point. We need to be talking about systems of change and not individual actors of change, and investing in how we collectively push the system. So yes, the investing in local ecosystems of change, this is something that is very dear to near, and would call on all of you to support local networks, local and national networks, to make that change. The second is that all the change I have observed within the system relies on champions, individuals within organizations that really drive forward, regardless of your positioning. And if you do not have a champion, and actually this is, all of you know this, right? If you do not have a champion, be that champion for your organization. Help others see and push your own organizations to make that change. And the last is that there are countless initiatives that are coming from the Global South to drive forward this agenda. And there are many people in this room that are leading these things. I think I saw Chilande in the back. I know Yoneko McBain from Malawi. There's so many. And it is, I am thankful we have Dagan, but it is not just Dagan. And I am thankful we have Amalia, but it is not just. And what you need to do is seek out these people and trust them, because they have the trust of their communities. So invest in indigenous Global South initiatives first. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A big round of applause to the panel. The great thing about today is there is still time to interact. You can learn more and share more, and I'm sure you're going to be blown away by the fireside chat, because they have 2 of my favorite people on it. So looking forward to that. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Excellent. Woohoo! Mosoon, I thought I was your favorite person, but that's all right. Guys, thank you so much. I just want to say a couple of things as the fireside chat folks kind of find their seat and gather themselves. 2 things, invest, invest, invest. We're investing in one another. There are champions in the room. You've heard these conversations, like everything that is good and worthy that we want to pass on to our children's children. We're going to repeat them. So be okay with that. I hope that's okay. The other thing is, yesterday at CGI on localization, there were a couple of people, Shaheen and Peter, I'm looking at you, because the localization, and McBain was on that panel around CGI and localization, we never thought it would be a topic. So I just want to say the first de-riskers, the pioneers, are not just local, it's also their champions. So I want to recognize Shaheen Kasim and Peter from the Conrad Hilton Foundation. 2 years ago, they said, we're willing to make this a norm, shift money, also not ignore our other partners, and can make this a collective system. So thank you so much, and over to you, Degan.
Thank you so much. So I have the pleasure of trying to create fire for Nasra, but also the pleasure of being here with some really amazing women. So I'm just really excited. I love it when we have an all-African female panel. That's very rare. I think this is probably like the second or third I've been on, so it's just, that's how rare it is. So first, I have Toyin, who leads, she's an African philanthropist from Nigeria, and she has her own foundation called the Wellbeing Foundation. And we have Fanta Toure, who also leads the Girls First Fund. She's the managing director. So I want to first go to Toyin. I know because of time, I'm going to try to ask the hard questions first. As an African female philanthropist who came into this space, I don't know how many years ago, how do you do your philanthropy differently than what you see your counterparts in the global north do? And what is your, not critique, I would say advice for change?
Well, first of all, good morning again, and everybody here. It's actually, to me, it's a big honor and a privilege to actually be in the bowels of Ford Foundation. And I should start with a little joke, actually, as an African female philanthropist. Many years ago, I had Ford Foundation. When I first started my foundation, 2004, I had Ford Foundation as my tenants in one of my buildings in Lagos, but I never had the courage to ask them for a grant. So as a female philanthropist, you know, I came to giving and working at the front lines because of my personal experience. You know, I had seen all the systemic deficits in the reproductive system, the journey to have women deliver safely. And then I was fortunate, or I don't know if it's good fortune or bad luck, but my husband went into politics. So I found myself in a completely different part of Nigeria, multicultural part of Nigeria. So I was a Christian married to a Muslim, in a state that was predominantly Muslim. And all of a sudden, I was really counting the death rates of pregnant women. And I decided to do something about it. Initially, I was looking at what the rest of the world was doing, because that was easy to find. In the countries where women are dying in childbirth, what is it that they're doing that the women are not dying in childbirth? And why are we dying in childbirth? So I did something that many typical philanthropists in Africa at that time, 20 years ago, wouldn't do. From day one, I embraced data. A lot of African philanthropy is based on emotion. So it's based on charitable giving. And you're supposed to be a cheerful giver. When you see a problem, you're supposed to bring out money and food. And whether you're Christian or Muslim, if you're Muslim, you go out on a Friday and you give out the money and the food. If you're a Christian, you go out on Sunday and give out the money and food. So I faced a lot of resistance, actually, at the beginning, when I was saying, no, I need data. So I wrote a health record for Nigeria. And people were saying, why don't you just pay their hospital bills? And I said, no, because I'll never stop paying their hospital bills. And by the way, there's a better method for their hospital bills. So we started community health insurance for their hospital bills. Because I'm not somebody that gets pleasure from standing in, the usual standing in a field with what they call underprivileged people, and giving out the mama kit and giving out the money. That doesn't float my boat. What floats my boat is community health insurance and, being able to cover a woman for less than $2 a year and insisting. So I've always co-created with my global partners. And I didn't see my global partners, you notice I'm not using the word donors. I didn't see them as donors, because that donor beneficiary almost turns me into the sort of women in the field that I didn't want to be. So I will normally start a program myself. If I believe in it, I will sit down, I'll write the structure of the program, whether it's health worker training, whether it's antenatal and postnatal classes, and I will put my own money into it. I will invest in the workforce to drive it, which largely midwives and nurses. You know, for years I tried to, and I'm looking at Sally as he's saying this, I tried to save women in delivery through talking to the doctors, and it didn't shift the needle. You know, maybe I saved 6 in a month. And then in 2014, I met midwives. And I realized that even if you look at the amount of time spent with a pregnant woman, the doctor pops into the hospital room at 7 a.m. in the morning and 7 p.m. in the night. And no offense to any doctors here. You know, they just pop in and they make sure, you know, your womb's gone back to the right position and, you know, pat you on the shoulder and off they go. So it's actually the midwife that actually escorts you through that journey. And to really fully understand it, rather than spending months writing reams of paper, you know, those 125-page proposals, I just woke up one day and I employed 4 midwives, and in 4 states. And I said, please go to the government hospitals, go to the private hospitals, and begin to talk to the women, begin to give them care. I didn't know at that time that I was shifting the health worker ratio. In fact, I couldn't understand why the hospitals didn't chase them out, because they didn't work there. But they're just going there. I'm paying for them to go there and care for the women and talk to them and educate them. And I later discovered it's because our ratios are so bad. So we have about 1 midwife to every 20,000 women in Nigeria in the public health system. And really, we should have about 1 to 80. So the hospital midwives and nurses welcome my midwives and nurses with open arms. And we have reached over 1 million women since I put midwives and nurses at the heart of our programming. Some of our classes have 120 women, but it gives me a pulse on exactly what's happening at the front line. For instance, I can just look at their pictures and I can say, oh my God, this particular community, this woman, I saw her a year ago, pregnant. How come she's back already in the antenatal? So we need to increase family planning in that area. And I keep going back to the communities, because as a woman, as an African woman, we are raised to be humble. But that humility actually is a plus, because we never say, oh, I've done and dusted this and everything's great. We keep going back. So as a philanthropist, I have run, for instance, in a state of 38,000 square kilometers, and the whole of Nigeria is over 980,000 square kilometers. So scale means a completely different thing to me than it would mean to somebody, say, in Sierra Leone or, you know, whatever. I had one program with the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. My donor partner was Johnson & Johnson, and we wanted to train health workers post-field with anatomical correct models to improve the availability and quality of maternal care in an entire state by removing the margin of error. So it's not just saving the lives, it's also removing birth injury, like fistula. And that program was 800,000. And I'm using it as an example because it was a typical example of the challenges I faced as a female philanthropist. So I had come and I consider myself Global South. So a lot is said about localization, but my organization is local, but I am quite obviously global. So when I'm negotiating with my partners, you know, I'm global. The negotiations can be quite tricky at times because I'm not as quiet as, say, a local would be, and I'm not as emotional either. Now, this particular program was £800,000. I had found this technology and these models, and I said, this is what we need to remove the margin of error. For me to argue to use the same models to teach the mothers was where the local in me came out, because my donor only wanted to teach the health workers. with the models. So I managed to wangle in a clause that meant that my organization was in charge of the storage and movement of the models. So after each class to the medical workers, I added on a class at my own cost to the mothers. So it actually meant that if I'm teaching about de-risking postpartum hemorrhage, which means, first of all, you need to bring out the placenta and, in this particular state, they had been bringing out the placenta by tugging, whereas the correct method to bring out the placenta is to sweep inside the woman's womb. So we taught the doctors, I taught the midwives, but I also taught the mothers that, by the way, when you're in the labor room, if anybody's pulling, warn them to stop. Here's what your pelvis looks like with the model. Here's what your placenta should look like when it comes out. So the mothers became partners in the improvement of their outcome. But even in that, there was a colonial aspect. In a grant of £800,000, I had covered the risk of bringing this large technical partner to Nigeria. They got 750,000, and I got 50,000. Now, if I had been just looking for the money, I probably wouldn't have accepted. But I accepted because I felt that that knowledge and that technology and that methodology was going to be essential. And I'm happy to say, actually, that in the first 6 months of that grant, the mortality went down instantly by about 22%. The state was the 34th worst. Prior to that program, it was a 5-year program, in mortality. But till today, since the end of that program in 2021, till today, without a commensurate investment from the government, and I'll get onto that in a minute, they are the highest survival rates and lowest birth injury rates in Nigeria consistently. So, as a female philanthropist who is a Nigerian, I live in the same communities, I am driven by the fact that I have to look. I'm part of that community, so if you are part of my community, as I'm designing the program, I have to look you in the eye. So gone are the days, I remember when I first started in 2004, there was a USAID grant available, and it was for family planning and reduction of sexually transmitted diseases. And so I thought, oh, it'll be nice to get this grant. When I went to apply for the grant, it involved sending counselors to go to bus stops to hold female condoms and pillory and hector people into using female condoms. I looked at myself, I looked at the grant, and I told my grant writing team, just leave that one, I cannot, in all good conscience, send a program officer to a bus stop in a community which I am part of, in a Muslim part of the country, where even when women go out, they're escorted by their muharram, their father or their brother, to be standing and dangling female condoms. If you tell me that I can take it to the hospital and talk to them quietly, or I can take it to the mosque or to the market, possibly. But, this grant, I don't know who's going to be dishonest enough to take it. I'm not going to take it because I'm not going to stand at a bus stop, telling conservative women, to come and take this. So what we have is contextualization. And there's a growing movement now, and I'm seeing it in a lot of my global partners, where, in fact, I've just come out of a very nice ceremony 2 days ago, where in the resource mobilization, and I am wearing a UNHCR tag here, because I do partner with UNHCR, but I partner with them differently. A lot of the globals now want us to mobilize domestic resources, which is fine, we do that anyway, but they want us to give them the domestic resources so that we can get a tick on the UN stage, and then 2 years later, they want to give us back a portion of those domestic resources. Now, I don't mind, yes, a very small portion usually. I don't mind mobilizing domestic resources for disaster relief. You know, at the moment, 1 or 2 states in Nigeria are submerged by water because a dam was not properly maintained, and it's a serious humanitarian crisis. I run refugee programming in Cross River State, and even that is a typical example. So I'm an ambassador for UNHCR. My dear friend Mabel, actually, I think, was the one who originally introduced me to UNHCR, and I went out to look at their refugee programming, and they've got some very big ticket programs there. But I noticed from talking to the women, because I always believe you must listen to the community, and I also don't like that word beneficiary, so listen to your participants. And they told me that they had come across from Cameroon, and a lot of them had professional qualifications, and they're living in this refugee resettlement community, because they're not going home anytime soon, of over 60,000 people. But they can't work because they haven't been given their documents yet to be able to work, so they don't have an identity. And so on the spot, I just decided, well, I would start my maternity program in that settlement, in the hospital in that settlement. And I'm not going to go and bring a midwife from anywhere else. I just said, okay, how many of you here are midwives? And how many of you are nurses? And I employed them on the spot, and then sent one of my master trainers to train them in the way we give our classes. And that actually is one of the strongest of my maternity programs now. And again, we have wiped out death in childbirth, but we have to keep going back. So because I'm a woman, so if I don't know, I don't want to make this gender specific, but if I was a man, I'd probably just pat myself on the back, get a PR company to do a lovely documentary, and, you know, trot across to the UN every September and, you know, wait to be praised. But I keep going back. So going back to these programs at the front line are what made me, for instance, start hygiene programming. Because I saw some data that showed me that, okay, I've trained the midwives, they know what to do. Trained the mums, they know what to do. But by the way, the labor rooms don't have clean water in the labor room. They don't have clean water, they don't have soap. So is that the cause for the death on day 7, maternal sepsis? So I went back in 2018, started very major WASH programming, did it in 3 states, and then I found a partner. You know, a partner, one of my global partners in the private sector, Reckitt, said, oh, you know, we see what you're doing, we like it. But how did they see what I was doing? That, again, is a very funny story. You know, I run most of my programs in government facilities because that's where the masses are. And then we also put in private facilities. So I think it was 2018 African Vaccination Week. And I had, you know, the global partners and local partners of the federal ministry. We got ourselves together to run African Vaccination Week, and they said they wanted to give me a prize. I'm local, so I actually flew in from London. I arrive in Nigeria, and the ministry cancels African Vaccination Week. I think they had their own problems of how to explain to the country's first lady how it was me that was getting the prize and not somebody else. But anyway, that didn't bother me because my midwives are in hospitals all the time. So I just went off and did my own vaccination week. And as I got to the hospital, the mothers, because they heard I was coming myself, and this was the days when, you know, in the north of Nigeria, people were running away from polio because of the disinformation that polio caused sterility. So the women felt that if I was coming myself to vaccinate their children, I surely wasn't going to look them in the eye and give their children anything bad. So I get there, and there are about 2,000 women, you know, just from word of mouth, waiting for me. So I said, okay, if I'm going to do the vaccinations myself, they should give me water, let me wash my hands. This is actually how I started WASH programming. Because I'm not going to carry somebody else's baby without washing my hands. We have a greeting in my language for a grandmother. If your daughter's had a baby, we greet you, Ekwawalumi. Because as a grandmother, you're going to be washing your hands every 5 minutes before you carry your daughter's child. So I just said, please give me water. Let me wash my hands before I start carrying their babies to vaccinate them. When they brought me the water, they had to go and fetch it from a well. Then the soap was really old and gnarly. But anyway, so I started to wash my hands, and one of my assistants saw the crowd, didn't know what I was doing. She just put a camera up in the air. So I'm washing my hands, and this amazing midwife who works in the PHC, at this point, she forgot about status and everything, and she started giving me very brisk instructions, you know, scratch the back of your hand, and, you know, do underneath. And I was following her instructions, as you do, because a Nigerian midwife can even command a baby to come out of a womb. So you know, I followed her instructions to the letter. And out of pure mischief, actually, later, I said, oh, let me tweet this, the journey to the PHC, where we're chasing goats and chickens out of the way before we get there. And this hand washing, and all of a sudden, I get a Twitter DM from Global Water 2020 saying, we're very excited. We saw you washing your hands. Please, can you come to Washington? And then they gave me all this data. I met with the World Bank and I said, okay, it's time to go backwards in time and advocate through action to push my country to health and hygiene. So a lot of the programs that I will start, I start with my own funds. And I will start it at scale. It will be small in my country, but it's at scale if you're looking at the numbers anywhere else. And then if I have a global partner, they will come and it becomes a bigger program. So what I'm trying to say is that as African philanthropists, we must retain our agency. We must retain our autonomy, and we must sit down at that negotiating table. I don't care how much money you're bringing. You are going to design that program with me, and it's going to fit. When I'm designing a NICU program, my partner's arguing with me, why are you putting a fridge into the NICU program? And I'm saying, why are you assuming that these 6 NICUs that we're doing this program in, why do you assume they have a fridge? I've given them the pump. I've given them the lessons. The data assistant is telling me she can't get data back from one NICU. My program officers, who are big in the office, are telling me they don't know why Kuchingoro hasn't brought back any data. Then I finally sent somebody to Kuchingoro and said, why don't you have data? The remaining 5 have brought back data. And they sent back a request for a cooker. So I said, a cooker? So I go back to the grant. There's nothing in this grant that says I should be cooking lunch for the specialists in the NICU. Why do you want a cooker? And this takes about a month. Finally, I called them myself. CMD, why do you want a cooker? He says, Madam, we can't use the breast pump until we sterilize it. I said, oh, you want a sterilizer? Okay, no problem. And I write the sterilizers into the ground. So 6 hospitals get sterilizers, but it didn't occur to them to ask for sterilizers. And that is the reason why we have to be global. Yes, USAID or Ford may say, this is what we want. I'm not going to be one of those implementers that I'm happy that this problem has not been solved because it means I'm going to get another grant next year. We have to make it fit for purpose. We have to put the detail in, the respect for the front line in. And yes, so that's what floats my boat. Wow. I'm starting a jaundice program now and I'm excited about it.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you. That's amazing. I think you just clearly demonstrated as a philanthropist, just as much as a local organization, why it's important to be local. And I love that new term, local. We're going to start using that. Fanta, because of time, I'm going to go to my big question, which is, if you had, you can, maybe in that answer, you can also talk a little bit about the Girls First Fund and the work you guys do and how you do it differently. But if you had a magic wand, yeah, what would you do to restructure the philanthropic space or the development space? You've worked with Adeso, so you've done a local NGO, you've done the World Bank, you've done another philanthropic organization, and now you're running a fund, an intermediary of sorts. So you've seen all the different aspects of the space. So what would you say needs to happen to change the architecture? What would be that new thing in your magic wand that we could see?
Thank you again. It's a tough one. And I loved that we got to hear a concrete example of how it looks like. Thank you for sharing that. But also I want to say the role of a champion, because I think it's using your power and privileges to push the conversation in a certain direction. And that's also what I think is the superpower of those of us who are local. I'm using local now moving forward. The magic wand. To be honest with you, I would change the systems that make philanthropy as it is exist in the first place. That makes it possible for someone to amass so much wealth, which includes generally exploiting some people that we now have to think about redistributing. But I'm also fascinated by humans. So I think I would run a little bit of a social experiment to go back to something that Benjamin was saying actually is how power plays into this. And I think my global experiment is, I would say, for 1 full year, people in the global north or in a position of power are experiencing the reality of those from the global south who are asking for funding. And people from the global south have these resources and infrastructure to move on the work. And I'm very curious about what's going to happen to this at this moment. For those of us in the global south, are we going to be ready to take that opportunity and run with it and turn into action everything that we are consistently preaching and fighting for? And for those in the global north, how does it feel like to now experience what it is to be on the receiving end of power being exercised in a certain way? And after that year, I would shift it back and let us have, hopefully, real collaboration and real conversations around how to fix the system. And I would want young people to be in the lead in co-designing what that real collaboration can look like. Because they're bringing creativity, fearlessness, they're bringing their expertise to those conversations. And I think it's needed and it's necessary.
That is so cool. It reminds me of something that we were thinking about in the Pledge for Change. The Pledge for Change is a commitment to change that INGOs have made, including Oxfam. Abby's here, one of the pioneer CEOs. So we worked with CEOs of INGOs for a year to come up with these 3 commitments. And one of the things we were thinking about is, could we get a Global South executive director like McBain to actually sit in the seat of Abby for a few months or a few weeks, and just switch the roles and have Abby run McBain's organization for some time. You know, it gives you such humility, honestly, and it's such a great idea. Now, last question, because we have to wrap up. On the Girls First Fund, can you tell me just some practical things that you're doing to make that shift happen for young leaders and young women?
I have to say that we're fortunate at the Girls First Fund. We were pioneered by Mabel Van Orange, who's sitting here, and a group of philanthropists that I think have believed deep understanding and knowledge of how the space needs, because they had been listening to the space before. And I have to give a shout out to Guy Cave. He may have left, but he helped design this before I came on board and led it. And the principle was, we're going to give core, flexible, long-term fundings to local organizations who are doing the work. We're not going to tell them what to do. We're going to listen to them and follow their lead in what they believe is the solution to ending child marriage. Everybody has a role to play in the ecosystem, and I think once you put humility as the core of how you're approaching something, and you're deeply listening to the partners, and resourcing what they want to do, then you're playing your role of both resourcing and supporting them. And in this conversation of expertise, I think it's important to also be careful in saying that people from global majorities know exactly what to do. What we've seen is that community-based organizations are excellent at engaging the community and do have technical knowledge here and there, but there is also a kind of technical knowledge that comes from others in the ecosystem that is necessary for them to maximize the impact of the work that they're doing. And sometimes the facilitation is putting together for peer learning and peer building to learn in community, but bringing that kind of external knowledge that you have mentioned and letting them adapt it as a local solution, we found is very helpful. And I think that notion of humility also goes back to who we are funding, how you are funding, and how you're engaging the partners that you're supporting. And so we do a lot of participatory designs, co-designs with our partners, with co-design funding instruments with young girls, and mostly we ask them what success looks like for them so that we can support them towards that success. I think there starts to be a challenge when we start naming capacity or technical expertise as an obstacle to funding and partnering in a meaningful way. It is not. We've seen people being willing to create new infrastructures from scratch. And that shows that when you want to invest in capacity, you do. So it shouldn't be an excuse, but there needs to be honest conversations towards what that capacity is and what we need to build it. And then a bit of humility also, I think, is necessary in terms of creating new instruments. You know, we're talking about supporting a system or creating a system. A lot of organizations want to create a new instrument. We don't need to reinvent the wheel at this stage. Things exist, things have been created. How do we leverage them to move money to where it needs to be, I think, is where the money is.
Great, thank you so much, Fanta, that's amazing. Let's close this fireside chat and go to Q&A. Thank you both, it was amazing.
Maybe if you guys, if you feel comfortable, you can stay here. Another round of applause for this incredible fireside chat. If it wasn't a concern, I would actually probably do like a little lighter, but I can't do that. I've been told that that is not good. I know people have to leave. We have this room until 11. We want to hear from you. And I see in the same amount of time where I was recognizing everyone else who's been pioneers and champions, we have Jamaica Maxwell with Packard. So I just wanted to say I recognize you, and I know there's many people who I don't know, but really, hands up, conversations, questions, contributions. I really want to make this last 10 minutes very active. So don't all raise your hands at once. But what's occurred for you? What have you thought about? What do you just want to say? I want to amplify, I love, I want to elevate. I see Peter. Peter always helps me out.
Thank you very much. I wanted to render a little account to folks and talk about a rendering of account next year in terms of the donor statement, bilaterals, and philanthropy. We've got 21 OECD countries that have signed on. That is a majority of the OECD, and in a dollar amount, it's close to 95% of ODA dollars. Germany and Italy have not yet signed, if any of you have contacts. And I'd salute USAID and Norway, who were really the poets behind this. I call it a lyrical statement. Any one of you could have written it. It was mentioned before that it doesn't have numbers in it, and you know why. It's a consensus statement, and that got people over the line. But think 25%. That's WHS, that's USAID, that's the credibility floor. And 27 foundations, including the Council on Foundations, which I chair, and the European Philea. We're going through our own capacity building, and we need your help. So, you know, we're trying to define, as you were, we are trying to have consistent data reporting, and we're trying to put together principles of good donorship. I would love your feedback either spontaneously here or through me and Shaheen over the next weeks on that. We'll come back to you at UNGA next year. And, you know, we talk a lot about shifting and sharing power. I think that's important, but what was said up here is also important. Foundations are really more into control than they are into power, right? The power is out there, and we are both trying to work together in a power field that is much bigger than either philanthropy or civil society organizations. But we need to get over our control, and you need to help us do that. There's a lot of opening to that. I think even in the bilaterals, there's a lot of opening, and we're trying really to help that. Yeah, let me leave it there, but the door is open, and we are very interested in everyone's feedback. And you guys are awesome. Thank you.
Excellent. There's a few other colleagues who are also going to come around. So just please raise your hand or just scream. I welcome a lot of screaming. I see one hand here. Go ahead. And then I'll come back to one more hand on this side.
Hi, my name is Claire Cook from the People Support Foundation. I really enjoyed the talks today. I really liked the naming of systems of colonization and decolonization, and I wanted to see like what the interest is in the philanthropy community for naming another system, imperialism, hyper-imperialism, the constant drive towards war and exploitation of resources and of people, and if we can start bringing that problem, the global systemic problem named into the conversations.
Excellent. Super easy. Super duper easy. I want to add one more, so please remember, red jacket in the back, if someone can help me. Oh my God, we love those kind of questions.
So I'm following up with another easy one. It's been touched upon briefly by this last speaker and over here, but I wonder if part of the question, and it's a question on how the Global South plans to do this, I wonder how much the problem is the distribution of wealth and how it is done, and how much the problem is the accumulation of wealth. Because here we are still accepting the broken by design system of some accumulate enough to have the power to decide how it is distributed. So should the question be, how do we distribute or how do we accumulate? And the question is, how can the Global South be ready not only to receive, and within the Global South, the inequalities, not only to receive, but how to make sure that nobody has that power over other people on the first place.
Excellent, excellent. I think those are two big questions. I wonder, we'll have more. I'll come at least 2 or 3 more times. But again.
Let me give you the hard one.
I'm happy to take the hard one.
They're both hard.
They're both, okay, why don't you talk about the distribution or accumulation of wealth,
Okay.
and you talk about the imperialism.
Well, when you come from the Global South, first of all, you need to understand how our 1% or 2% accumulated that huge wealth in the first place. You know, the Global North had a more egalitarian start to life. So everybody had the same opportunities in the Global North. But in the Global South, that was not the case. Most of our systems in many of our countries arose from feudal systems. There was no universal education until the last 20 years. So those that were educated actually are as wealthy as they are because they had the education to become as wealthy as they were. That accounts for maybe 30% of their wealth. The rest of their wealth actually arose from dysfunctionality. You know, those who had knowledge and could apply solutions to dysfunctionality became very, very wealthy by applying solutions to that dysfunctionality, and those who didn't have the knowledge just didn't have a chance. So simple redistribution of wealth through taxation, which is, you know, what most countries are doing, I don't believe will really sort the problem, and certainly not in a generation. I still believe that those 17 goals, and most particularly within those 17 goals, the human rights, the right to education, and really what we're talking about is the right of any citizen of any country to be invested in by their country. I have struggled for years to find the value of a statistical life in Nigeria. And I have not yet been able to come up with an accurate figure. But I know that in the USA, it's about $48,000. So that's basically what the government spends on everybody that is born in that country, whether or not through accident or birth, whether or not they're born wealthy or they're not. So we need to go to the root cause. And some of us that understand this, yes, we still do our philanthropy, we still do our charity, but we try to put in rights-based indexes to all our work. For instance, at my foundation, we have a women, girls, and gender development target that has 17 goals of our own, that every program that we operate or run has to tick those 17 goals. Otherwise, we don't run it, you know. And basically, actually, I've got them written down here. And they're goals for girls, but they work for everybody. So we have to plan with our participants in mind. We have to make sure that part of the funds we're expending in that programming stays in that location after we leave. Every time we're designing a program, at the beginning is the co-creation, but the end of the program is as important as the beginning. We have to put in the knowledge transference and then the learning from that program. And I try actually to write in a 25% that allows me to go back to a location a year later to help to reinforce if they need that reinforcement. So it's not going to be a redistribution the way the Global North looks at it. First of all, we have to redistribute the knowledge. Then we redistribute the investment, and that is done by repeated replenishment of the investment. And I don't really waste my time shaming the wealthy. Some of us were born like that. It's a matter of, do you care about your community, and can you sleep at night if your house is the only house that's lit up and every other house around you is in darkness? And so I think if we're taking the one health, one world approach, we have to invest in all the people that are around us. And I've simplified it a lot, but I'd like to see governments take that approach.
I'm going to try to tackle both of them at the same
We're
time.
so African, we keep saying, I'm like, it feels good.
Can't take it out of a girl, can't. I believe in the rights to live with dignity and freedom. And I think that is at the heart of how I would answer your question. I think it's both about accumulation and both about distribution. But I also believe in movements. When I was younger, I would say, power is not given, it's taken. And I think it's great to be having these conversations. And I think there are actors in the space that needs to keep the fire alive. But I've also reflecting on where I'm coming in as a local and looking at all the allies that we have sitting in Global North institution. I believe in being very strategic and tactical, and calling a spade is a tactic, but there are other tactics that I think we should be able to use in our arsenal. One of them being, sometimes there is no point in calling names because you're working with someone who's trying to change the architecture as hard as you are. So how is it that you actually partner with that person to look beyond the system and how you can fix it? But we cannot wait to have the answer to these solutions to move forward. In the meantime, there are some mothers who are dying giving birth. We work on ending child marriage as an entry point, maybe because this girl was married when she was 12 because her family decided that that's the value that she had, or because that was the most logical alternative for them to guarantee the best possible life for their daughter and to survive. So I look at all of this as a set of tools and different battles that need to be fought at the same time by a complementary set of people to work towards a common result.
Great, thank you.
Surprising. Thank you. We have other panelists as well, so I just want to open it up and say if you have any additional thoughts, please. But yeah, we have one more round. Raise your hands. I have one here, and then I'll come back for one more.
Thank you. That was brilliant fireside chat, and this was amazing. I'm sure everybody had fun. I just want to plug in one thing, but before doing that, I want to say to your comment about the experiment switching Global North, Global South, I really like the idea, but I would take it a step further and just switch the entire population, just so that everybody experiences everything about how it feels to be, or how to exist, how people exist in those different geographies, but it's not just geographies, but like, you know. So the thing that I wanted to tell everybody about is, I don't know if people know about this organization called Catalyst 2030. I'm sure many people who are attending this event probably do, but there is a subgroup within that called Shifting the Funding Paradigm. And I would invite people to reach out. If you haven't joined this group, please do so. It's a group of people who are thinking very hard about this question of changing funding and how it works. I just wanted to share that. Thank you so much.
Such an incredible resource. Look up Catalyst 2030. There's one more person in the back. Yes, please, my sister.
This is a typical being voluntold. Thank you, Maura. I appreciate all of you, my sisters. The whole conversation has been fantastic, and I know for those who know me, you know I can do another 1 hour conversation just adding on to everything that you all have said. So I appreciate everything you represent and what you put to the table. Now, one of the things, as we think about how philanthropy can lead the way, I just wanted to put greater emphasis, and I'm glad for all the work that Hilton, for example, is leading the way with trying to change your systems. So one of the things that they've done is enabled a couple of us to come together, again, through Catalyst 2030. Very unlikely people that came together but are feeling this pinch of, okay, philanthropy can do a lot, but there's a lot of very significant barriers to them actually doing that stuff. So those of us who are working very directly with different types of philanthropy have come together to try and look at what are some of those key barriers. One of the biggest ones that lots of local organizations talk about is just the basic entry point. Some of you call it due diligence processes. Some of you call it, compliance requirements. Some of you call it, there's different ways in which, it's put out there. But either way, it's a way in which you're checking to see whether or not you want to actually engage into a relationship. So a couple of us have come together. We are calling ourselves a very fancy word, the Compliance Conundrum Collaborative, because it is a conundrum. And we're trying to see what is this exactly? What is necessary for you to actually look at? What should we also be looking at? And then have a conversation with philanthropy organizations to say, actually, can you just please take this out? This is not necessary. Maybe add on this, because there might be some things also that you're overlooking in 2024. There may be some additional things to look at. But really, we're just trying to see how can we unlock that first barrier into entry. And so for those philanthropy organizations, foundations that are here, the reason why I want to plug it is to say we are actually collecting everything that you're putting together, all the requirements that you have. And it's interesting, we are also hearing, okay, we don't really require that, but when we get to start engaging with you, we might want you to do this, right? So if those things are there, please also highlight them. We don't have it today, but maybe, Maura, we can figure out how to send out the link. So for those who are willing to participate with us, let's have that dialogue. We have come up with a checklist to just see what are you asking for? And then we want to have dialogue moving forward with you to say, this may be okay, this may be not, this can we discuss? Kind of thing. So I just wanted to put that out there to help contribute to the conversation. But thank you for everything.
I love it.
Thank you for volunteering.
Thank you so much. I asked not only for Q&As, but also for contributions, and I'm so happy that the last two were, and I know there's many more. You have either airports to go to, other meetings, or funds to give away. So I just want to say thank you so very much. A round of applause for all of you, and I want to give a moment of gratitude and conclusion to Degan and to our amazing panelists. So over to you, Degan, just to close us out.
Honestly, I just want to say thank you. That's all. I know you're all in a rush, so hopefully we'll continue the conversation. But next year, what I would love to see is that we actually have more solutions from the Global South featured rather than us continuing to have this conversation, but real practical things happening. So thank you all. Thank you.